So this video is this tutorial video, that is based on one of the most enigmatic yet most mysterious, okay, yet most misunderstood houses of the horoscope, which we call as the eighth house. Okay, so eighth house is also known as the Randhara Bhava. Okay, it is the house of deaths, right? It is the house of deaths, and it is very, very feared. The eighth lord, it will create problems wherever it goes. And there are a lot of other enigmas and rather misconceptions associated with the with the eighth house. So I'll try to see what those mean. And in my personal opinion, based on my limited understanding of the eighth house, this eighth house is a very it is a very paradoxical house. Okay, Shri K.N. Raoji, he says that it is the house of agony as well as ecstasy. Right now, here by ecstasy, I don't mean ecstasy due to a lot of money, but due to the rise of the Kundalini. Okay, the eighth house is also related to the rise of the Kundalini, and that is the reason it is known as the house of spiritual ecstasy. Okay, but then it is also the house of agony. That means most people suffer a lot of traumatic experience when they go through the dasha of the eighth lord, right? Or if a planet is placed in the eighth house, then those that the dasha of that particular, the Vimshottari dasha of that particular planet can be very, very terrible. Okay, so now if we go and look at the indications of the eighth house, okay, if we look at the indications of the eighth house, we can see that the BPHS tells us a lot of things about the same. Okay, so what happens is the BPHS, it calls the first house as Dhanu, that means the body. Okay, the second house as Dhana or wealth. The third house is known as the Sahaja Bhava, which is also the house of brothers. Okay, it also refers to those things which we get it easily. Sahaja also means easily. Okay, the fourth house, it is also known as Bandhu, right, which stands for, of course, relationship, kinship. It is also the house of mother. It is also the house of happiness, right? The fifth house is known as the Putra Bhava, of course, the house of children. But then we have to be careful when we call it as the house of children, because the fifth house is the house of children only in case of males, right? In case of females, the ninth house becomes the house of children, whereas the fifth house is the house of adopted children for females, that is. Okay, the sixth house is, of course, known as the Ariha Bhava, which is the house of enemies, deaths, and diseases. So the seventh house is known as the house of Yuvati, or the house of spouse, but it not only denotes the spouse, it also denotes your business partnerships. Okay, so the eighth house, I'll come to the eighth house, right? So the ninth house, it is known as the house of Dharma, right, which is also the house of religion, the house of higher education, and things like that. The 10th house is no house of karma, which implies the action that you do in the world. Okay, it also in a way implies a professional livelihood, but again, in my experience, the 10th house is not related to your to your actual work that you do. It actually relates to to the way you complete work. Okay, so if your 10th house is afflicted, then you would find it very, very difficult to complete what you have started or what you have begun. Okay, the 11th house is, of course, the house of gains, of fulfillment of desires, which is known as the Labha Bhava, and the 12th house is known as the house of Vyai. Okay, it is known as the house of Vyai. It is also the house of house of solitude, house of aloneness, house of expenses. It represents all the things that are going away from you. Okay, now coming to the eighth house, as I said, the eighth house is known as the Randhara Bhava. Okay, now Randhara, it has a lot of meanings in Sanskrit. Okay, and what I have come across as the meanings of Randhara, which hold perfectly for the eighth house, is that it represents opening. Okay, it represents a fissure, it represents a chasm. Okay, it represents a hole or a cavity. It can also represent a particular aperture of the body. Okay, so it is actually strange, right? It is actually strange because the BPHS, or the Brahat Parashara Hora Shastra, it calls the eighth house as Randhara Bhava, which actually also means a hole. Okay, it means a hole, because a hole can also relate to the sign of Scorpio, because Scorpio represents a hole that is bottomless in nature. Okay, that is bottomless in nature. And then it also uses Parashara also calls the eighth house as the house of longevity. Okay, So for example, if a planet like Saturn is placed in the 8th house, then it tends to increase the longevity of that person, right? It indicates, it increases the longevity of that person, but that longevity can be quite painful in nature. Okay, so by Randhara, we can also refer to underground as well as hidden places. Again, referring to the house of Scorpio, right? So now, if you go to the chapter called Bhava Guna Swarupaya, okay, that means the qualities of the houses in the Brahat Parashara Hora Shastra. What Parashara recommends is that the 8th house has to be consulted or has to be studied to know about longevity, okay, about battles, about enemies, about forts, that means your protection, okay, about wealth of the dead, and also about detailed knowledge of past and future lives. So as you can see by these descriptions, the 8th house can be considered to have an enigma of its own. Okay, and again, the 8th lord is the most evil, it is the most evil planet in the horoscope, so as to say, because it will create problems wherever it will go. Okay, that is the reason it is recommended. It is said, as astrologers, it is taught that if the 8th lord goes to a dusthana, that means if the 8th lord is in the 8th house, or if the 8th lord is in the 6th house, or if the 8th lord is in the 12th house, then it is actually good. Okay, because then it is giving you some respite from the evil effects that is connected with it. Okay, now if we look at other texts, right, if you look at other texts like the Phaladipika, okay, so again, Phaladipika has a lot of things to say about the 8th house, right? It refers to Mangalya. Okay, Mangalya means the auspiciousness of married life. Okay, that means, because the second to every house is the house of sustenance, so the 8th house practically sustains the married life of that person. Okay, so it is also, some classical texts also say that if you have a malefic planet in the 8th house, then it is very bad for the married life, because you are not getting the right sustenance for your marriage. Okay, it is also known as Malin. Malin is a Sanskrit word for the word, Sanskrit, it in Malin, it actually refers to dirt. Okay, then it is also known as the Adi Bhava. Adi Bhava means mental pain, mental turbulence. Okay, then it is also known as, Parahava. Okay, Parahava means, it could mean defeat, it could mean insult, it could mean humiliation. Okay, so this is a very prominent feature. If someone is running the dasha or the antardasha of the 8th lord, that person can undergo a lot of humiliation, can undergo a lot of, can be subjected to a lot of defeats, a lot of insults from others. Okay, it also refers to Ayush, as I said, longevity. Okay, it also refers to Klesha. Klesha means arguments or annoying situations. It also refers to Apavad. Okay, Apavad is scandal, right? It also refers to Aswach. Aswach, of course, is impurity. Okay, it refers to Vigna, which is obstacles. And it also refers to Dasa. Dasa means attendants or slaves. Okay, so here I don't mean servants. Okay, for servants, we'll look at the 6th house. But by the word dasa, it means slaves. Okay, people who are forced to listen to you. Now a servant may or may not listen to you, right? It is a very give and take relationship that you have between you and your servant. But a das is someone who is forced to work for you, or who is forced to listen to you. So that you can actually look at, or you can study the 8th house to look at that, to look at that part of it, right? Again, by if you look at Uttar Kalamrit. Okay, if you look at Uttar Kalamrit, what happens is that it gives you around 28 descriptions of the 8th house. Okay, so I'm just before coming to the charts, I'm just trying to just tell you regarding what the 8th house actually means, and then we can see. Okay, we can see what results the 8th house dasha or the 8th lord dasha brings. Okay, so Uttar Kalamrita, it gives a lot of descriptions of the 8th house. It again, Uttar Kalamrita, we know it is written by Kalidas. It is not the same Kalidas who is associated with Ma Kali. It is a different one. Okay, so the identity is fictitious, but nevertheless, it is widely accepted that Uttar Kalamrita is written by Kalidas. Okay, so Uttar Kalamrita, what it says, it gives us various descriptions of the of the results that can follow from due to the 8th house dasha, or due to the dasha of the 8th lord. Okay, so it says that it can the 8th lord dasha can bring longevity. Okay, it can also indicate money coming from the death of someone. So in the modern day, it can actually mean money received from insurance. Okay, suppose someone has died and you receive you inherit that insurance money of that person. Okay, it it also refers to the killing of the killing of a living being. Okay, so this is something that is very prominent in in most of the charts that I have studied, because in some of the charts of of criminals who have been accused of manslaughter, or maybe some serial killers who have been who have been accused of killing a number of people, you will see that when they committed these heinous crimes, so as to say, they were actually running the dasha of the eighth lord, or or the dasha of a planet that is connected to the eighth house. Okay, it can also mean amputation, right? This is very very common, because recently I had consulted someone who had lost one of his limbs due to a bike accident, and that person was just that person had just started the dasha of the eighth house. Okay, and then it can also it can also refer to utmost mental anguish. That means some death like experience, some death like pains. Okay, some suicidal thoughts. So these are all these are all related to the eighth house, the dasha of the eighth lord, or maybe the the dasha of the planets connected to the eighth house. Okay, so this is what Uttar Kalamrita says, right? But other than that, as I said, the eighth house also refers to the Kundalini awakening. Okay, it refers to occult sciences. Okay, it refers to psychology, it refers to psychotherapy as well. Okay, and some astrologers call the eighth house as Mangal Sthana. Okay, some because as I said, the eighth house feeds the seventh house. Okay, it is second to the seventh house, so by that principle it feeds the seventh house, so it is also known as Mangal Sthana, that house which sustains the marriage. Okay, it can also mean it can also mean taxes from the government. It can also mean some chronic and incurable diseases. Okay, it can also mean bankruptcy. There are a lot of cases where, if you look at the details, if you study the charts of businessmen who had gone through a period of bankruptcy, you will see that most of them were running the dasha of the eighth lord, or maybe the dasha of the planet that is some way connected to the eighth house or the eighth lord. Okay, now let me come to the agony part of it. Okay, as I said, Shri K.N. Rao ji, he considers the eighth house to be the house of agony as well as ecstasy. But let's first look at the agonizing part of the eighth house. So the eighth house, it has the reputation as the worst amongst the dusthanas, or the trick houses. So which are the trick bhavas? It is the third house, the sixth house, the eighth house, and the 12th house. So these are the trick houses. Okay, and because it is the worst of the dushthanas, or the trick houses, third house is of course not a dusthana, it is a trick house. Okay, sixth, eighth, and the 12th are the dushthanas. Again, 12th is it is debatable if you call it a dusthana, but sixth and eighth, these are the most terrible dushthanas. Okay, sixth house will create conflict wherever it sits, and eighth house will create problems wherever it sits. The eighth lord will create problems wherever it sits. Okay, so during the dasha of the sixth lord, or during the dasha of the eighth lord, there is no doubt that if the planet is highly afflicted, okay, if the planet is placed under the worst of conditions, or if the eighth house is highly afflicted, then the worst of things can happen. For example, you can get murdered, or worst of it, you can actually end up murdering someone. Okay, so these are the these are the things that are associated with the eighth house, right? Any doubt till here? I'll just go to the chart analysis part in that case, if there are no doubts. Okay. Okay. So this is the chart, this is the chart analysis part. Yes. So this is the chart, first chart that we are taking. Okay. So look at this chart. Mithun Lagna, Jupiter placed there, because Mithun is the Lagna, so the eighth lord is Saturn, and we are seeing Saturn placed in the 12th house. Okay, so the eighth lord going to the 12th house, not a bad position. Okay, not a bad placement, right? Not a bad placement. But then if you look at the chart, this is this is the chart of a of a murder victim whose name was Sharon Tate. Okay, I don't know how many of you have heard about Sharon Tate, but she was she was an actress in the 1960s and the 1970s. Okay, so in August of 1969, if I remember the year correctly, the USA was shocked by a series of murders. Okay, and the murders, they were committed by a cult group which was known as which was known as the Mason family. Okay, and if you can just search Google for the Mason family murders. Okay, they had a leader whose name was Charles Mason. Okay, so this chart of Sharon Tate. Okay, he was she was pregnant at that time. Okay, she was pregnant at that time, and she was stabbed to death. Okay, she was stabbed to death by one member of the of the Mason family, right? So if you look at the chart, okay, if you look at the chart, look at the look at the Lagna Lord. The Lagna Lord Mercury. Okay, the Lagna Lord Mercury is combust. Okay, it is combust, and it is also retrograde, right? It is combust as well. It is retrograde, right? And that is in the 8th house. So this is a primary Arishta yoga. Okay, Arishta yogas are not very prominent. Okay, but I have selected charts that have an Arishta yoga. So this Lagna Lord is combust as well as retrograde, and it is placed in the 8th house, right? So if the Lagna Lord goes into the 8th house, you'd suffer primarily because of your because of your decisions. Okay, because of your indecisions rather. It can also it can also give you a very short span of longevity. Okay, combust Lagna Lord can cut your longevity significantly. Okay, and see this Lagna, look at the Lagna is aspected by the 6th Lord Mars. Okay, Mars is actually looking at the Lagna by its by its direct drishti, right? Now you'll say that Jupiter in the Lagna is good. Okay, but why is it not protecting? Because Jupiter is retrograde, right? So because the graha is retrograde, if this Jupiter is retrograde, if a prominent planet like Jupiter is placed in the Lagna and it becomes retrograde, then it loses its protective ability. Okay, it is losing its protective ability. And you look at Jupiter, it is the 7th Lord which is placed in the 1st house. Okay, so what it means, it means the 7th, the Maraka, it is a Maraka Lord, right? The 7th Lord is Maraka. Similarly, the 2nd Lord is Maraka. So the Maraka coming to the 1st house, it means there is a very prominent Arishta yoga. Okay, so she was murdered in the period of moon which is afflicted by Rahu. Okay, look at the moon, right? Look at the moon, it is with Rahu. So the moon is the moon is afflicted, the moon is under eclipse. Now look at the dispositor of the moon. The moon is placed in Leo, and where is the dispositor placed? The sun is placed in the 8th house. Okay, the moon is the moon is placed in the moon's dispositor is placed in the 8th house. Okay, and the moon is in the moon is in the nakshatra of Venus. Okay, the moon is in the nakshatra of Venus, and both are in the 8th house, right? And the Antardasha was that of the sun. Okay, when she was murdered, she was running the dasha of the moon, which is already afflicted, and she was also running the Antardasha of the sun, which is in the 8th house. Okay, and look at the look at the 8th Lord Saturn. It is again retrograding in the 12th house. So anyways, the 8th Lord is evil. Now if it is retrograding, it becomes a double evil. Okay, because not a double evil but a triple evil, because retrogression means the planet's strength has increased by 3 times. Okay, now you may ask why, if a retrograde planet's strength is increasing by 3 times, why is this Jupiter not protecting? Because if a planet is retrograde, it is actually giving the results of the results of the opposite house. So Jupiter, by being placed in the Lagna, but since it is retrograde, it is actually giving you the results of the 7th house. Okay, so Saturn, although it is retrograde, it is giving the results of the 6th house, which is directly opposite to the 12th house. Okay, that is how you look at it, right? Any doubt here? Okay, proceeding to the next chart. All right. So this is the chart of of a person who was murdered in the during the Rahu Saturn period. Okay, and the person was about 25 and she was about to marry during this time, right? So why I'm showing this chart, because as I said, if the eighth lord is poorly placed, okay, if the eighth lord is poorly placed, then it can be a cause of a very short lifespan. Look at the chart. This is Virgo rising. So the eighth lord becomes Mars. Mars is debilitated. Okay, so the eighth lord is very badly placed. And if you look at Saturn, it is a place in the eighth house, but it is debilitated again. Okay, so this is a very this is a very bad condition. Okay, so look at Rahu. As I said, the person was murdered during the Rahu Saturn dasha. Okay, so look at Rahu. Rahu is placed in the sixth house. Okay, Rahu is placed in the sixth house, and again it is forming an Arishta yoga because it is a malefic which is afflicting the Lagna Lord Mercury. Okay, and look at Mercury, it is placed in the 12th house with a very dark moon. That means the moon is the moon is just the moon is just out of Amavasya. Okay, so it is still very it is still very dark. Okay, so this Rahu, it is actually afflicting the Lagna Lord Mercury, which is anyways placed in the 12th house. So that is a that is a bad placement. Okay, so now Rahu, if you look at this chart, Rahu is actually giving you the results of the 8th house in two ways. Okay, how is it giving you the results in the two ways? Look at where Rahu is placed. Rahu is placed in Aquarius. Okay, so the dispositor is Saturn, right? So Saturn is debilitated in the 8th house. Okay, and again Rahu is also being aspected by the 8th lord Mars, which is debilitated by being in by being in Cancer, as well as it is combust because it is very close to the sun. Look at the degrees between Mars and sun, it is very close to the sun, so it is combust, and this Mars is giving a direct aspect to Rahu. Okay, so that is the reason why the bad condition of an eighth lord can also cause a shorter lifespan, and in this case the person was murdered. Okay, all right, chart number 3. Yes. So this is again Virgo rising. Okay, I don't have any enmity with Virgo rising people. I'm just showing how because I have been collecting charts of those people who have been agonized during the dasha of the eighth lord. So this Gemini rising or Virgo rising is coming up very prominently. Again, Virgo rising, the eighth lord is Mars. It is placed in the 10th house. So eighth lord going to the 10th house, it can it can cause problems in completing work. Okay, it is a good Chandra Mangal yoga, but I'll show you what the problems are. Okay, so I've taken this chart to show that during the dasha of the eighth lord, there can be a lot of chronic, incurable, and deadly diseases that can trouble a person. Okay, so at the age of 39, this is the chart of Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, so at the age of 39, Franklin Roosevelt, who was of course the president of the USA, we know that he was paralyzed because of polio, right? And he actually governed the country from a wheelchair. Okay, so he was consigned to his wheelchair because his lower limbs were paralyzed due to polio, and that happened during his Saturn Rahu period. Okay, so look at the 8th house. Saturn, which is the 5th and the 6th lord, it is debilitated in the in the 8th house, and the 8th lord Mars is afflicting the Lagna. Okay, look at the 8th lord Mars. So it is looking at the Lagna. Okay, and then Rahu, because it was the Antardasha lord. Okay, it is giving the results of the it is giving the results of the of the 8th lord Mars, right? Because Rahu is placed in the sign of Mars, so Rahu will give you the results of the 8th lord Mars. And because look at Rahu again, it is coming 8 from Saturn. Okay, so 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8. So Rahu is also 8 from the from the dasha lord, which is the Mahadasha lord, which is of course Saturn. Okay, so this is how this is how the 8th lord can give rise to some chronic as well as incurable diseases. Okay, so this can lead to a lot of agony, right? Okay, chart number 4, again Virgo rising. Okay, so this is of John F. Kennedy. I had discussed this in the in the Darakaraka session as well. So John F. Kennedy, his ascendant is Virgo. Okay, and here again he is having an Arishta Yoga. Okay, because the first Lord Mercury is in the eighth with the eighth Lord Mars, right, and it is aspected by the sixth Lord Saturn, who is also aspecting the Lagna. Okay, the first Lord Mercury, if you see, is with the eighth Lord Mars, and it is again aspected by Saturn. Both of them are aspected by Saturn, and Saturn is also casting its terrible third aspect, on the Lagna, right? So because Saturn was aspecting his Lagna, so the health problems remained throughout his life. Okay, his health problems remained throughout his life, and it was actually, he suffered from a disease which is known as addition disease. Okay, which is incurable. Okay, because the body is not producing sufficient hormones. Okay, and then in this disease what happens is the adrenal glands, they produce too little hormones. Okay, the hormones are, I've forgotten the names anyways. I suppose it is cortisol, and the other one I have forgotten. Okay, so Addison's disease is a it is a very it's a very incurable disease, and it's a very terrible disease to have. Okay, and the symptoms, they would be they would be constant weakness, constant fatigueness, right, and hypertension as well. Okay, now if you again follow this chart, what happened is that in his Mars Mahadasha, okay, he suffered prominent back injuries while playing while playing sports in college, and then again he suffered back injuries during the आज मैं बहुत सारा खाना भी try किया what's this? Yeah, please mute yourself. Yeah, okay. So it was during this Mars period when he was when he suffered some very terrible back injuries. Okay, and when he was in the Navy, then also he suffered. That was the time of the World War, if I was not mistaken. Okay, that was the time, if I'm not mistaken, that was the time of the Second World War. Okay, so his torpedo boat, it was attacked by the Japanese, if I'm not mistaken, right? And these events, they actually led to two major operations, and that gave him some very terrible chronic pain throughout the rest of his life. Okay, so this is about the agony of the eighth house. Now a special mention of the moon, right? The moon, basically what happens is the moon is said to be Maran Karan Sthan in the eighth house. Okay, it is known as Maran Karan Sthan in the eighth house. And if the moon is the eighth lord, or if the moon is the or if the moon is in the eighth house, then the moon is considered to be naturally afflicted. Okay, right? If the moon is in Scorpio, it is considered to be debiliated. But if the moon is the eighth lord, or if the moon is the eighth, if the moon is in the eighth house, it is considered to be a case of natural affliction. Okay, now this affliction will become more prominent if the moon is in Gandanta. Okay, Gandanta, as we know, is the zone between the fire and the water sign. Okay, for example, there is a Gandanta between Cancer and Leo. Okay, or there is a Gandanta between Sagittarius and Scorpio, right? So there are three Gandantas, right? There are three Gandantas. So if the moon is in Gandanta, or in Gandanta degrees, then it is considered to be a serious affliction, right? Again, if the person is born during Krishna Chaturdashi or Amavasya, then it is a very serious problem. Again, if the moon is going to the eighth house and the person is born during Krishna Chaturdashi or Amavasya, it's a very serious problem. Okay, I've discussed this in details in my Panchanga masterclass. Okay, again, if the moon is conjunct or aspected by a retrograde malefic, so if a planet is malefic, the natural malefics, of course, are Mars, Saturn, because Rahu and Ketu are anyways retrograde. Okay, so if the natural malefics like Mars and Saturn are retrograding, and then they are conjunct or aspected, if they are conjunct, or if they are being aspected by a moon, by the moon, then also it can cause some issues. Okay, again, if such a moon in the eighth house is conjunct or aspected by a marak, okay, by a marak means the second lord or the seventh lord, then it can also cause a problem. Okay, so Gandanta is the worst problem, right? Gandanta is the worst problem. and followed by Krishna Chaturdashi. I have mentioned, because Chaturdashi is a, it's a very difficult time to be born in. Okay, and Amavasya, it not only causes afflictions to the moon, it also causes afflictions from Jupiter. Okay, all right. Okay, this is chart number 6, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, yes. Okay, so I'm just, as I said in the beginning, the eighth house also is a cause of scandal. It's a cause of humiliation. So this is a chart of Bill Clinton. Again, I had discussed this chart in the Darakaraka session for an entirely different reason. Okay, so this is Bill Clinton's chart, and he underwent a lot of, humiliation, disgrace, and mental agony. Okay, due to the scandals which broke out during his Jupiter Moon period. Okay, so we all know that the sex scandal that erupted when he had been, accused of receiving oral sex from from a 22-year-old intern from the White House, Monica Lewinsky, right? And then he lied about it. Okay, and then he lied about it, and then he got impeached by the House of Representatives. It was a big storm. If someone is born, or if someone was, if someone was an adult or a teenager during that period, everyone can relate to it. Okay, and then he was put on a trial by the US Senate. Okay, he survived politically, of course, but his tenure as the president was forever tarnished, right? And actually the news headlines, they run stories, they run multiple page stories about him, and how the scandal had tarnished the reputation of the president of the USA, right? And look at this, during this, as I said, the scandal happened during the Jupiter Moon period. Okay, so look at the moon. It is in the eighth house, aspected by the sixth lord Saturn, right? And if you look at that, if you go into details, you'll understand that he was also going through Sadhisati. Okay, Sadhisati, as we know, it is Saturn's deadly transit over the moon. Okay, all right, so this is the next chart. Right, I'm not disclosing the name. Okay, I'm not disclosing the name. This is, I'm just putting this chart out for a client. Okay, this is the chart of my client. Just a minute. Let me confirm. Yes, yes. So this is the chart of my client. Okay, so she was she is a teenage girl. Okay, she is a teenage girl. Her parents actually consulted for this horoscope, and she was involved in a severe back accident with her boyfriend. Okay, and that has put her in coma. Okay, that has put her in coma, and now she has gone completely into a vegetative state. Okay, so this happened in her, in her Jupiter Mercury Saturn period. Okay, and if you look at it, all the planets, they are in the eighth house, right? So what happens is, what I'm trying to say by putting out this chart is that, the eighth house can also show a very strong potential for a severe bodily injury, which involves vehicular accidents. Okay, it can show a severe, a very serious vehicular accident, right? Because if you look at it, the lord of vehicles is the fourth house. Okay, the fourth house is the primary house to see for vehicles, right? So if you look at the fourth house, Saturn is the lord of vehicles. Okay, and it goes into the eighth house of Jupiter, which is again the sixth lord. Okay, and sixth lord, we know it is the house of accidents, right? So in any case, if the fourth lord and the sixth lord, this can be used as a predictive technique also. If the fourth lord and the sixth lord are connected, okay, it can cause some vehicular accident. And if the eighth lord is also involved in that accident, then the results can be very, very traumatic, can be very, very terrible. Okay, so this is also a combination for Arishta Yoga, like, because see, the first lord and the eighth lord Venus. Okay, the first lord and the eighth lord Venus, they are in the sixth house in Parivartan with the sixth lord Jupiter. Okay, not only the first lord is exchanging signs with the sixth lord with a Parivartan Yoga, right? It is also aspected by a retrograde Mars. Okay, it is also aspected by retrograde Mars. And if you look at Mars, Mars is a double maraka. It rules the second house as well as the, it also rules the seventh house of the Libra ascendant. Okay, so second house and seventh house is, is ruled by Mars, and because it's a double maraka, so it is, the first lord after being involved in a parivartan yoga with the sixth lord is also getting aspected by this retrograde Mars. Okay, so this is all about this is all about the agony connected to the eighth house. But let's if we try to end it, let's end it by a few positive outcomes from the eighth house as well. Okay, so this is the chart of a lottery winning couple. Okay, I'm putting out the charts of both the husband and the wife. This is the chart of the wife, and then this is the, just remember the positions here. Okay, see the eighth lord Jupiter. It is, it is going to the fifth house, right? And this is the chart of the husband. The eighth lord Saturn is going to the ninth house. Okay, so this is the chart of the wife, and this is the chart of the husband. Okay, so let's first look at the chart of the wife. Yes, so look at the wife's chart. The Jupiter, the Jupiter eighth lord. Okay, eighth lord Jupiter is going into the fifth house. Okay, so of course this is not good, because because the mantra bhava, the fifth lord, is also known as the mantra bhava, mantresha. Okay, so if the eighth lord goes into the fifth house, there would be a lot of problems if you do mantras. Okay, so eighth lord going to the fifth house, you cannot recommend mantras to the client, right? But then Parashara also says that this is a combination for exceptional wealth. Okay, because if you look at this Jupiter, it is also the fifth lord in the fifth house. Okay, it is also the fifth lord in the fifth house, and then it is, it receives a aspect from the 11th lord, which is placed in its own house. Okay, the 11th lord is Mercury, and it is directly aspecting Jupiter, right? So Jupiter here is exceptionally strong because because it is in its Mula Trikona. Okay, Sagittarius is the Mula Trikona, and if you look at the chart of this lady, Jupiter is Vargottama in many other charts as well. Okay, so this is not much of a concern, but because Jupiter is very strong by being in Mula Trikona, by being in its own house, and by receiving a direct aspect from the 11th lord, so it indicates that winning a lottery was always in the cards. Okay, and even it actually happened in the Jupiter Ketu period, right? Because the Ketu is in the, look at Ketu, it is in the, it is in the seventh house of the spouse, which is giving results of the seventh lord Saturn, who is again with Jupiter. Okay, and then there is also a nakshatra exchange between Jupiter and Ketu. Okay, so there is a, there is a lot of good thing coming from this eighth lord dasha. Okay, now look at the husband's chart. So again, the husband's chart, it shows him winning in a major period connecting to the eighth house. Okay, so Rahu is conjunct with the eighth lord Saturn in the ninth house, giving the results of Jupiter, which is, which is involved in a very strong Dhanu yoga with the ninth lord in the second house. Okay, so in my next, in my next webinar, I'll discuss the wealth yogas that are present in the horoscope. Right, so for the moment, just know that if the second lord or the ninth lord are anyways connected, it forms a very strong Dhanu yoga. Okay, so this lottery was actually won during the Jupiter Rahu period. All right. Next one. So as I said, besides making you wealthy by by winning lottery, okay, by winning lottery or through inheritances, the eighth house or the eighth lord can also be involved in Viprit Rajyog. Okay, so what is Viprit Rajyog? Viprit Rajyog is a condition where the sixth, eighth, and the 12th lords are together placed either in the sixth house or in the eighth house or in the 12th house. Okay, that means the Dusthana lords are placed in the Dusthana itself, right? And they have to be alone, they cannot be joined by any other planet. Okay, and that is a very that is a very powerful and complete Viprit Raj Yoga. Okay, but Viprit Raj Yoga comes with its own sets of rules. For example, for a Viparit Rajyog to happen, the Lagna Lord has to be weak. Okay, Viparit Rajyog cannot happen in case of a strong Lagna Lord. It has to be weak. That is number one. And number two, all of them, all of them should be placed alone. As I said, there should not be any other planet joining the combination. Okay, so look at this, look at this chart of Viparit Rajyog. So this is the chart of Philip Graham, right? He was, of course, a US politician, member of the US Congress for 23 years. Okay, first in the House of Representatives and then in the Senate, right? So this Viparit Rajyog, it actually caused this, this huge rise of fortune. Okay, look at the chart. The 6th Lord Mercury, the 8th Lord Sun, and the 12th Lord Jupiter occupy the 6th house. Okay, so he was first elected to Congress during the Rahu period. Okay, giving the results of the 8th Lord Sun, and then followed by the 16 years of Jupiter. So it's a it's a huge thing. Okay, Viparit Raj Yoga, it's a huge thing. It can it can catapult you to fame all of a sudden, right? Okay, these are the charts that I wanted to I wanted you to look at. If you have any other questions, you can ask me. Otherwise, we can we can go to the last part of this discussion. Okay, so coming to the coming to the end of the just stopping the share here. Okay, so coming to the final part of this discussion, the 8th house is also connected to past life depth. Okay, anyways, everything that you see in the chart is because of past life karma. Okay, that is anyways because of past life karma, but the 8th house particularly is connected to past life depth. Okay, and if you if you take the if you mapped the 8th house of the Rashi chart in the Navamsha, it is actually known as the 64th Navamsha. Okay, it is also known as the Khara Bhava, right? Khara, it is actually a reversal of the word Rakha or protection, right? Rakha means protection. So Khara is a reversal of the word Rakha, and Khara was also the name of the commander-in-chief of the of the army of Ravana in the Ramayana. So Khara means removal of protection. Okay, so the principle is that any graha which is going into the 64th Navamsha, okay, any graha which is going into the 64th Navamsha will indicate some past life association with a signification of that graha, and is also indicative of past life deaths. Okay, any graha which is going to the 64th Navamsha. Now, how to find out the 64th Navamsha? It is the 4th house from your Navamsha Lagna. Okay, it is the 4th house from your Navamsha Lagna, right? So any graha which is going into the 4th house from Navamsha Lagna can cause a lot of problems. Okay, even if it is a benefic, it can cause a lot of problems. Okay, except Jupiter, right? Except Jupiter, it can cause a lot of problems, right? So it is very, very, it is very, very ideal that if the 4th house of Navamsha is empty, okay, and if it's a malefic, then it indicates an extreme level of agony and pain. Okay, it can indicate an extreme level of agony and pain, right? So which are the malefics that can go into the 4th house? The sun. Okay, the sun can can cause a lot of ego issues. Okay, that can break the marriage, that can that can destroy your domestic peace, that can destroy your mental peace, right? Saturn, of course, is associated with sorrow and grief and pain as well, right? Then Rahu, it leads to cheating. That means the native will be cheated a lot, or you will be cheated a lot. And then Ketu represents shock. Okay, the maybe the partner is cheating, and you have the marriage has broken and you are in a lot of shock, right? The benefics, right? The benefics in the 4th house of Navamsha can indicate a lot of happiness. Okay, for example, Venus, it can indicate a lot of happiness from the spouse, it can indicate a lot of happiness from comforts and vehicles, etc., right? Mercury, it can make one very, very very, very good in calculations. It can give one a very sharp intellect. Okay, Jupiter, look at the 4th house. If someone has a Jupiter in the 4th house from Navamsha Lagna, then always go to that person's house and you will see that person, even if it's a very small house, the person is living like a king in a very in a very in a very pompous way. Okay, so he or she is very, very happy if there is Jupiter in the fourth house of of D9. And again, moon going to the fourth house, the person will be very, very sensual in nature. Okay, he will be very, very sensual in nature. And the Khara Bhava, it can also be used to time events, to time events of misfortune, right? Suppose there is a there is a graha transiting your 64th navamsha. For example, Saturn is transiting your 64th navamsha. It can it can indicate a lot of grief and sorrow. Okay, of course, navamsha transits would be very, very the time period will be very, very slow. The time period will be very, very less, but it can indicate a lot of a lot of turmoil if Saturn is transiting your 64th navamsha. Similarly, if Jupiter is transiting your 64th navamsha, it can actually it can actually indicate someone getting married. Okay, it can also be used to time marriage and things like that. All right, so that ends the that ends the session. Okay, that ends the session. I'm just taking the questions now. If anyone of you has a question, please please ask me. If Jeshta has Gandanta point, Jeshta's ruler Mercury is enemy of Rashi Lord Mars. Still, Moon gets debilitated in Vishakha and not in Jeshta. Can you please tell why? You have to look at the stories of the nakshatra. Okay, because nakshatras are not studied by looking at the planetary rulers. Nakshatras are studied by looking at the nakshatra devatas. Okay, look at the nakshatra devatas. This is a hint I'm giving you. Okay, look at the nakshatra devatas and see see the relationship of the nakshatra devatas and the graha devatas. Then you will get your answer. Okay, I'm leaving this out for you. If you still don't get it, then please ask me in the group. I'll be glad to answer it. Okay. Anything else? Okay, then, since I'm not getting any more questions, I'd be ending the session. And thank you everyone for joining in. Yeah, thank you everyone for joining in. Next Wednesday, I'll have another session on the wealth yogas in the horoscope. Okay, and next Saturday, we'll be joined by Goelji, who is a renowned Lal Kitab astrologer on the mysteries of, on an introduction on the mysteries of Lal Kitab. Okay, so we'll be taking questions as well. So Saturday, we'll be having that session from either 7 or 8 o'clock after a confirmation from Goelji. And thank you everyone for joining in. It was really a pleasure hosting this session. The recordings will be available on YouTube either today or tomorrow morning. Namaste. Om Gurave Namaha.